They say a man's home is his castle, but they forget that every castle has a dungeon, and every dungeon has a master who knows exactly where the foundations are weak. As I sat in the corner of my own living room, listening to the clinking of champagne flutes and the high-pitched laughter of people who didn't know my name, I looked at my son Mark. He was standing by the fireplace, the one I had built 40 years ago, toasting to his newfound real estate empire. To the future, Mark shouted, his face flushed with expensive Scotch. To owning the land you stand on and never letting anyone take it from you. I took a slow sip of my water, my hands purposefully trembling, just enough to keep up the facade. He looked at me then, a flash of pity and irritation crossing his eyes to him. I was just Arthur, the retired, slightly senile father who was lucky enough to be allowed to stay in the guest wing, a relic of the past, waiting for the clock to run out. He didn't know that 10 minutes ago I had sent a single, encrypted email to the county clerk's office. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought that by tricking me into signing a caregiving agreement, he had secured the title to this $15 million estate. He was already planning to leverage the equity for a high-risk venture in the Maldives. What Mark didn't realize was that I wasn't just his father. I was the senior founding partner of Sterling Associates, a firm specializing in ironclad asset protection and estate litigation. I had spent 40 years building cages for the greedy. Did he really think I hadn't built one for my own flesh and blood? Enjoy the toast, Mark, I whispered to myself. Because by Monday morning, you won't even own the shoes you're standing in. The air in the house had changed the moment the ink dried on the caregiving agreement 6 months ago. Before that, Mark and his wife, Chloe, were the picture of filial piety. They visited every Sunday. They brought my favorite brand of tea. They listened or pretended to listen to my stories about the bench and the bar. They expressed deep concern about my health, suggesting that managing a property of this size was becoming a burden for a man of my age. Dad, Mark had said, his voice dripping with faux sincerity, we just want you to be able to relax. If you transfer the deed to us, we'll handle the taxes, the maintenance, the staff. You'll have a guaranteed suite for life, professional care, and the peace of mind knowing the Sterling legacy is safe. It's a win. Win, I knew what they wanted. They didn't want the legacy, they wanted the liquidity. They saw a house in a prime zip code and saw a bank account they could raid. I played the part of the aging patriarch perfectly. I hesitated. I struggled with the pen and finally I signed. The transformation was near. Instant. The professional care turned out to be a revolving door of low-cost, part-time assistants who spent more time on their phones than checking my vitals. My guaranteed suite was downgraded from the master bedroom to the drafty guest room above the garage because Chloe decided the master suite had better lighting for her social media content. But the breaking point came this morning, just hours before their celebratory party. I was in the kitchen, trying to boil some water for tea. Chloe walked in, dressed in a silk robe that cost more than my monthly allowance they provided. Arthur, honestly, she sighed, clicking her tongue as she took the kettle from my hand. We've talked about this. The steam ruins the custom cabinetry, and besides, Mark and I were looking at the floor plans today. We're going to need the guest wing for the new home gym. It's part of the lifestyle branding for the new firm. I looked at her, my expression carefully blank, and where am I supposed to go, Chloe? She didn't even look at me as she poured the water down the sink. There's a lovely assisted living facility in the valley. Sunset Meadows. Mark already toured it. It's very efficient. We've already initiated the transition clause in the caregiving contract. Since you're becoming a safety risk to yourself, the agreement allows us to relocate you for your own protection. A safety risk? I asked softly. You left the stove on last week, Arthur. Or at least, that's what the affidavit from the caregiver says, she smirked. I knew then that they had bribed the staff to manufacture evidence of my incapacity. They weren't just taking the house. They were discarding the human being who gave it to them. Later that afternoon, Mark came into my room. He didn't knock. He didn't even sit down. He just tossed a folder onto my bed. It's all set, Dad. The movers will be here on Tuesday. Don't make this difficult. I've already secured a $5 million line of credit against the house to fund the Sterling Global expansion. If you try to fight this, you'll just be wasting the little money you have left on lawyers who can't beat the contract you signed. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a cold, hard edge. Face it, Dad. You're yesterday's news. I'm the one with the power now. I have the deed. I have the contract. You're just a tenant-at-will who's overstayed his welcome. He patted my shoulder, a gesture of mock affection, and walked out to join his party. I opened the folder. It was a formal notice to vacate based on a breach of the caregiving agreement's safety protocols. They were using the law like a blunt instrument, thinking I was too frail to parry the blow. But Mark made one fatal mistake. He assumed that the deed I signed over to him 20 years ago, the one that sat in a blind trust until the caregiving agreement activated, it was a standard conveyance of title. He didn't realize that in the world of high-stakes estate law, a gift is rarely just a gift. 20 years ago, when I first drafted the Sterling Family Trust, I had anticipated this exact brand of arrogance. I had embedded a conditional gift deed with a right of reversion, a legal poison pill triggered by a very specific set of circumstances. One of those circumstances? The bad faith attempted alienation of the grantor. By trying to evict me under a fraudulent claim of incapacity, Mark hadn't just breached a caregiving contract. He had tripped a wire that would automatically revert the entire property title back to me, voiding any encumbrances he had placed on it, including his $5 million loan. He thought he was playing checkers. He didn't realize I'd been playing three-dimensional chess since before he finished law school. I reached into my bedside drawer and pulled out a burner phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "This is Arthur Sterling," I said, my voice no longer trembling. "Activate the Scorched Earth protocol on Title 44. B. File the lis pendens immediately. I want a freeze on all assets associated with the Sterling Global LC by Monday morning. And call the forensic auditors. I think my son has been commingling funds." It was time to show Mark that while he might have the house keys, I still owned the locks. The weekend was a masterclass in psychological warfare. While Mark and Chloe spent Sunday nursing hangovers and browsing luxury car catalogs, I remained in my room, the feeble old man they expected to see. I even let my hand shake a little extra when Chloe brought me a lukewarm bowl of canned soup, my farewell meal, as she mockingly called it. "Don't worry, Arthur," she said, looking at her reflection in my vanity mirror. "The facility in the valley has a communal dining hall. You'll make so many friends your own age. You won't even miss this old, dusty museum." I smiled vaguely, staring at a spot on the wall. "The museum has a very deep foundation, Chloe. It's hard to move things that are rooted so deep." She just rolled her eyes and walked out. She didn't notice the silent vibrator of my burner phone tucked under my pillow. By Monday morning, the gears of the legal machine I had spent 40 years greasing began to turn. The first blow landed at 9:02 a.m. Mark was in his office, which was actually my study, finalizing the paperwork for his $5 million line of credit with Apex Capital. I could hear him through the vents, his voice booming with the unearned confidence of a man who thinks has inherited the earth. "Yes, the title is clear," Mark barked into the phone. "I sent the digital deed over on Friday. The appraisal came in at 15.5. I need the first draw by noon." "Wait, what do you mean?" There was a long silence. I sat in my armchair, sipping a tea that was actually hot. This time it snuck into the kitchen while they were asleep. "A lis pendens? That's impossible," Mark yelled. "There's no pending litigation on this property. I'm the sole owner. Check the registry again." A lis pendens is a formal notice that a property's title is the subject of a legal dispute. It effectively clouds the title. In the banking world, a clouded title is radioactive. No bank will touch it. No loan will close. Mark's $5 million lifeline had just been cut, but I wasn't done. At 10:30 a.m., the second blow landed. Mark's sterling global expansion relied on a partnership with a major developer. They were supposed to sign the contracts that afternoon. But my old protege, Sarah Now, a high-powered partner at the city's most prestigious firm, had spent the night drafting a series of cease and desist orders. I had discovered that Mark was using proprietary trade secrets and client lists stolen from my old firm's archives to build his new business. It was a blatant breach of fiduciary duty and a violation of the non-compete injunctions I had written into his initial employment contract years ago. Mark's office door flew open. He stormed into the hallway, his face a shade of purple. I hadn't seen before. "Chloe, get in here!" he screamed. "What is it?" she yelled back from the master suite. "The developer just pulled out. They said they received a cautionary notice regarding my intellectual property, and the bank is freezing the credit line because of some clerical error with the deed." He started pacing the hallway right outside my door. "It's that old man. It has to be. Did he call someone? Did he talk to his old cronies? Arthur?" Chloe laughed, though it sounded forced. "Mark, he can barely remember where he put his slippers. He's been sitting in that chair for 3 days, staring at the wall. He doesn't have the mental capacity to file a grocery list, let alone a lis pendens." "Then who is doing this?" Mark roared. I leaned back and closed my eyes. "I am, Mark. I am. By 1 p.m., I decided to give them a little more rope to hang themselves." I walked out into the hallway, shuffling my feet, looking as confused as possible. "Mark, son," I called out, my voice cracking, "there are some men at the gate. They say they're from the state auditor's office. They're asking about tax clawbacks and unreported gift transfers." I told them you were busy, but they seemed quite insistent. Mark froze. The blood drained from his face. "The auditor's office? Why would they be here?" "I don't know," I whispered. "Something about the way the house was transferred? They mentioned something about a constructive trust and elder financial abuse inquiries." Mark grabbed me by the shoulders, his grip tight and painful. "What did you tell them, old man? Did you call the state? Did you tell them I'm mistreating you?" "I just told them you were a good boy," I said, looking him dead in the eye with a blank, watery stare. "I told them you were taking such good care of me that you were even moving me to a specialized facility tomorrow. I told them how much you wanted the house." Mark pushed me away in disgust. "You're useless, Chloe. Get the lawyers on the phone, not the cheap ones, the ones who handle aggressive asset protection. We need to bury this before the news gets out." What Mark didn't realize was that the auditors at the gate weren't from the state. They were independent forensic accountants I had hired privately. And while Mark was busy trying to bury the inquiry, they were already identifying every penny he had diverted from the family trust over the last 5 years. He thought he was defending himself against a bureaucratic error. In reality, he was providing my team with a real-time roadmap of his embezzlement. As the afternoon wore on, the minor failures began to snowball. His personal credit cards were declined. His luxury sous vide, registered under a company name that was now under investigation, was for repossession. The staff he had hired to replace my loyal housekeeper suddenly quit, claiming their employment bonds had been revoked by an anonymous creditor. By 6 p.m., the house was silent, save for the sound of Mark frantically typing on his laptop and Chloe sobbing in the master suite. They were trapped in a fortress that was no longer theirs, surrounded by enemies they couldn't see. I sat in the kitchen, making myself a proper meal for the first time in months. I pulled a bottle of 1982 Bordeaux from the hidden cellar, a bottle Mark didn't even know existed. I poured a glass, the deep red liquid, catching the light of the setting sun. To the future I toasted quietly, echoing Mark's words from the night before. to owning the land you stand on, and knowing exactly where the traps are buried. Tomorrow was the grand reveal. Tomorrow I would stop being the feeble father and become the senior partner one last time. I checked my watch. The movers would be here at 8 a.m., but they wouldn't be packing my things. They would be packing Mark's. The morning of the transition arrived with a cold gray mist that clung to the windows of the estate. At exactly 8:00 a.m., a heavy, duty moving truck pulled into the circular driveway. Followed by two sleek, black sedans, I was standing in the foyer, dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit I hadn't worn in years. I had shaved, my posture was straight, and the tremor in my hands had vanished. I looked like the man who had once terrified opposing counsel in the Supreme Court. Mark came stomping down the stairs, still in his workout gear, looking haggard. He hadn't slept. The circles under his eyes were dark enough to be bruises. "What are you doing in that suit, Dad?" he snapped, not even looking me in the eye. "And why are the movers here early?" I told them 9 o'clock. "Chloe, tell the staff to start with the guest wing." He walked toward the front door, throwing it open with a flourish of regained authority. "You guys are early. Let's get moving. My father's things are in the garage suite. Be careful with the desk. It's an antique." A tall man in a navy suit stepped out of the first sedan. It won a mover. It was Marcus Thorne, the city's most aggressive process server, flanked by two uniformed sheriff's deputies. "Mark Sterling?" Marcus asked, his voice echoing in the marble foyer. "Yeah, that's me. Why are the police here?" "If this is about that clerical error with the bank, my lawyers are already. I'm not here about a clerical error." "Mr. Sterling?" Marcus interrupted, handing Mark a thick stack of legal documents bound in blue backing. "I'm here to serve you with a writ of possession and an interlocutory injunction for the immediate vacation of these premises." Mark laughed, a high, nervous sound. "A writ of possession? For me? You've got the wrong name. I own this house. My father signed the deed over months ago." "Actually, Mark," I said, my voice calm and resonant, cutting through his bravado like a chilled blade. He didn't. Mark spun around, his eyes widening as he finally took in my appearance. He saw the suit. He saw the clarity in my eyes. Most importantly, he saw the man he thought he had buried. "Dad, what is this?" "This," I said, stepping forward, "is a lesson in the fine print, you see. Mark, when I established the Sterling Family Trust 20 years ago, I didn't just hand you a future. I created a conditional gift deed in the world of high value asset transfers. We call it a reversionary interest." I walked over to the hallway table and picked up a copy of the original trust document, flipping to the page I had highlighted in yellow. "Clause 14. C," I read aloud. "The transfer of title is contingent upon the grantee's adherence to the covenant of care. Any attempt to alienate the grantor from his primary residence under fraudulent pretenses, or any act of bad faith mismanagement, triggers an automatic right of reversion. The title doesn't just get disputed, Mark, it reverts. It flows back to me as if the transfer never happened. It is void ab initio, void from the beginning." Mark's face went from pale to ghostly white. You trapped me." "No," I corrected him. "You trapped yourself. You thought that by bribing a part-time caregiver to sign a false affidavit about my mental decline, you could trigger the caregiving agreement's relocation clause. But by doing so, you committed documentary fraud. That fraud triggered the reversionary clause. The moment you filed that notice to vacate against me last Friday, you effectively signed your own eviction papers." "But the loan!" Chloe screamed, appearing at the top of the stairs, clutching a designer handbag. "The $5 million. We already spent the first draw on the Maldives deposit and the new office lease." I looked up at her, a small, sad smile on my lips. "Ah, the loan. Since the title has reverted to me, and since the deed you used as collateral is now legally non-existent, Apex Capital has declared a material default. And because you signed that loan under a personal guarantee, thinking you were Bullathang Fo roof, they aren't going after the house. They're going after you." I turned back to Mark. The bank has already initiated a freeze and seize order on your personal accounts. They're piercing the corporate veil of Sterling Global LC because you commingled funds. Everything you bought with that money, the cars, the jewelry, the office equipment, is being impounded as we speak. Mark began to tremble, but this time it wasn't an act. He looked at the sheriff's deputies, then at the moving truck. The movers weren't there for my things. They were there to clear out his. You can't do this, Mark whispered. I'm your son. A son who tried to put his father in a safe facility so he could gamble with the roof over his head, I replied. You weren't looking for a legacy, Mark. You were looking for a carcass to pick clean. But you forgot one thing: I'm not dead yet. Marcus Thorne stepped forward again. Mr. Sterling, the deputies are here to escort you and your wife from the property. You have 15 minutes to gather personal essentials. Everything else, furniture, electronics, artwork purchased with diverted funds, stays here pending the forensic audit. 15 minutes? Chloe shrieked. I have a walk-in closet! I can't pack in 15 minutes! Then I suggest you start with the essentials, Marcus said coldly, as they scrambled upstairs in a panic, sobbing and arguing. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a fresh cup of tea. The silence that followed their departure was the most beautiful thing I had heard in 20 years. 20 minutes later, Mark and Chloe stood on the driveway, surrounded by 4 suitcases and a few cardboard boxes. The luxury SUV was gone, towed away by the bank's recovery team. They were waiting for a ride, share a humble end to their imperial ambitions. Mark looked back at the house, then at me, standing on the porch. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, broken desperation. Where are we supposed to go, Dad? He asked, his voice small. We have nothing. The accounts are frozen. The firm is dead. I walked down the steps, stopping just a few feet away from him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, laminated card. It was the brochure for Sunset Meadows, the assisted living facility Chloe had picked out for me. I hear this place is very efficient, I said, handing it to him. They have a communal dining hall. I'm sure you'll make plenty of friends your own age, or at the very least, people who understand what it's like to lose everything because they thought they were smarter than the people who built the world they live in. Dad, please, Mark pleaded. It was Chloe's idea. She pushed me to. Don't, I snapped, the fire finally showing in my voice. A man who blames his wife for his own lack of character is twice the coward. You signed the papers. Mark, you made the calls. You looked me in the eye and told me. I was yesterday's news. I took a deep breath, the cool morning air filling my lungs. Filial piety isn't just a word in a textbook, son. It's the foundation of a civilized society. When you crack that foundation, the whole house comes down. I spent my life protecting people from predators. I just never thought I'd have to protect myself from my own blood. I turned away from them, walking back toward the heavy oak doors of my home. I've left a small amount of money in a restricted trust for your legal defense, I said over my shoulder. You're going to need it for the fraud charges. Consider it my final gift. Use it to hire a good lawyer. Just make sure Hez not as good as me. I stepped inside and closed the door. The heavy thud of the bolt sliding into place felt like a period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. I walked through the quiet halls of the estate. The museum was mine again. The silence wasn't lonely. It was earned. I sat in my study, the one Mark had tried to claim, and looked out at the sprawling gardens. In the distance, I saw the ride, share car pull away, carrying the 2 people who had tried to erase me. They were heading toward a world of debt, litigation, and the harsh reality of their own mediocrity. I picked up a pen, a heavy gold-plated fountain pen, and began to draft a new set of documents. This time, the Sterling legacy wouldn't go to an heir. It would go to a foundation dedicated to protecting the elderly from financial abuse. Power isn't about the name on a deed or the balance in a bank account. It's about the wisdom to know when to hold on and the strength to know when to let go. I took a sip of my tea. The steam rising in the quiet morning light. For the first time in years, I wasn't just a father, a retiree, or a secret expert. I was free.